Before jumping into today's video, I do want to give a big shout out and thank you to Amazon Coins for sponsoring this video. If you're looking at pulling for characters in Final Fantasy Brave Exvius or other mobile games, I simply insist that you must use Amazon Coins, and the reason for that is because you can save up to 20% on all of your in-app purchases using the Amazon App Store version of whatever mobile game you're wanting to play, whether it's FFBE, War of the Visions, or anything else. I use Amazon Coins myself. I've been using them for years, and I've saved a ton of money on my pulls over the years, and I recommend that you do too. If you'd like to help support me and this channel, please click on my Amazon Coins link down in the description. It really does help me a lot and shows Amazon that I'm somebody that they should keep sponsoring, and it'll keep the content coming to you all year round. So thanks again to Amazon Coins for sponsoring today's video. Let's get into the fun. Hello again everyone, welcome back to another episode of Final Fantasy Brave Exvius. My name is Mars, and today we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy VI and the role it's going to play in Final Fantasy Brave Exvius in the future of the game, because if you haven't been keeping track, Final Fantasy VI cast members have gotten some serious overhauls, upgrades, and new releases in the Japanese version of the game, and they introduced some very interesting things that you ought to be aware of. So this video is a little bit clickbaity. I mean, I'm not being dishonest or anything when I say that you should save for Final Fantasy VI, or at least you should consider what the new Final Fantasy VI units bring so that you can be aware of their impact on the game as they come out in the global version in the months to come. So we're going to be talking about two separate banners. The first banner is for Neovision Terra and the units that accompany her. This banner is very, very awesome, and in my opinion, this is probably the better of the two Final Fantasy VI banners. If there's one of them that you would want to pull on, it is probably this one, and I'll tell you all about why. So the featured Neovision character on this banner is, of course, Terra, who in the future will get a CG limit burst. She doesn't currently have one because, you know, that's how they do it in JP now. They release a CG unit with no CG and then release the CG later. So she is really dope, and we'll talk a little bit about her in a second. On the banner as well is Realm, who is the new 7-star unit. She's a painter support mage sort of dealio. And then the featured units on that banner that are Neovision Awaken are Shadow and Archmage Kefka. So all of these units introduce some really interesting things that you're going to want to be aware of. The most important of which is probably Terra. Terra introduces something that has been dubbed or called Esper Fields, which is a unique new mechanic that currently only Terra can do in the Japanese version of the game. And the way that this works is that anytime Terra summons Ifrit, Shiva, Ramu, or uses her limit burst, it summons an Esper to the field, and they stick with your party for a certain number of turns, and while they are in play, they grant you and your entire party a buff of some kind. In Terra's case, when she summons Ifrit, Shiva, or Ramu, while they're in play, it boosts your elemental damage for magic attacks using that respective element. So if you summon Ifrit, your mages that do fire damage will get a 25% boost in their damage. And this stacks with other similar boosts. So for example, if you were to use an ice mage and you used Terra to summon Shiva to the field, and you used Yoshikiri to buff ice damage by 15%, you would have a multiplicatively combined total of it's like 43 point something percent boost in magic damage for any of your ice mages. So super, super powerful to be able to summon Espers to the field to grant you a battlefield effect. Terra's CG limit burst summons Maduin, who is a unique Esper to only her, and he buffs the LB damage of your entire party by 25%. So really, really powerful effect. Terra is currently the only person in the game who has it. I'm sure other people will in the future, but it is really meta right now. It's really powerful. If you want to squeeze a lot of damage out of your mages or your LB damage dealers, you absolutely want to be thinking about using Esper Fields with Terra. Really, really, really powerful. It's who I'm saving for next. It's who I'm pulling for next. In addition to that, Terra is kind of like Tifa in that she does limit burst damage in her shifted form, and she does a crazy amount of it, so she is very, very powerful herself in addition to the Esper Fields. So keep that in mind. That's what to look forward to with Terra and why she's an important person to be keeping in mind. The next two from that banner to talk about are Shadow and Realm, and they are some of the first characters in the game to introduce weapon imperils. So Realm has a 25% imperil to rod damage, and Shadow has an imperil to katana damage. And these work exactly like elemental imperils, where they reduce the enemy's resistance to that particular weapon type by that percent. So if you have a 25% imperil to rod damage, then it increases your damage by 25%. And this is it's very powerful. It's very good. It makes a huge difference in your damage output. One thing worth keeping in mind, just like when you're using two different elemental weapons and you're using element imperils, if you have two different weapon types equipped, the imperil will only be half as effective. So if you have Realm's rod imperil and you have a rod and a whip equipped, you only get 12.5% imperil effectiveness, for that character. Now, the other person who gets an imperil with the FF6 cast is Edgar, and we'll talk more about him when we're looking at his banner, because he comes on a separate banner with the Neo Vision Awakening. But these weapon imperils are the first of what I would imagine are going to be a bunch of different characters who offer weapon imperils, and some of these are very powerful ones. So Realm is for rods, and rods are used on basically every mage in the game. And then Shadow has katanas, which is good. And Shadow himself is a good unit. He is like a breaker, mirager sort of dealio. Quite good with the breaking and other support aspects, and then imperiling katana damage. So overall, really good banner. Every character is good on it, including Archmage Kefka, who we're going to talk about here. When you combine Realm with her Rod Imperils and Shiva with her Esper Field, suddenly Kefka, who was looking like a decent mage, now suddenly looks a lot better, because he gets the benefit of the Rod Imperils, he gets the benefit of the Shiva Esper Field from Terra, and if you have Yoshikiri, you can benefit from the ice damage buff as well. So you can really crank out quite a bit of damage with Kefka, even though he doesn't do as much damage as somebody like Neo Vision Celes. He does great damage, especially when you support him with the Esper Field and with Realm's Rod Imperils. So Kefka also comes on that banner. You basically get your 3-person kit for doing great magic damage. Really, really worth looking at, in my opinion. One of the things that I really like about Archmage Kefka is how easy he is to build. He is a true double hand mage, so you can get him quite easily up to, the 4,500 to 5,000 or 5,100 magic range. And if you have sufficient STMRs and vision cards, you can do that with a couple of free slots. So this is just an example build, okay? This is like a top-end build, except Wizards, Petasos. I don't know why I don't have something better in there, but, it's what we got. You can build him up quite nicely. He's quite decent, and the fact that he does ice damage with Terra and Realm makes him a very appealing option. So overall, I think that banner is super, super good. The next banner we want to look at is the one that features Neo Vision Lock and 7-star Setzer, okay? And I'm not really going to talk about Setzer because he is basically a spirit throwing weapon damage dealer, but he's worse than Yoshikiri, and he doesn't really offer very much. I could see him being useful in PvP because he's got some nasty status ailments similar to the original Setzer, but other than that, we don't care about him on this banner as much. What we care about is Neo Vision Lock, we care about Edgar and Sabin, who both get Neo Vision Awakenings, and rest in pepperonis, Celes. I don't know what she did to Gumi that they won't put her on a banner, but here's hoping that we get a Neo Vision Celes at some point, because goodness, the girl deserves it. She's honestly the best character in the game, after the FIGA Bros. I mean, I can't help myself, okay? They're handsome men. I just cannot resist. So anyways, speaking of handsome men, we're going to talk about Locke real quick. Neo Vision Locke is kind of the next evolution of a Vaughn Breaker, Chainer, Mirager, damage dealer sort of dealio. Locke has a ton of random-ish stuff in his kit. He's got a bunch of weapon imperils, and they're not as strong as, say, Realm or Shadows. I think Shadow is at like 20%, and Realm was at 25%. Locke has imperils for throwing weapons, bows, and guns. So these are a little more obscure. If you happen to be using somebody like Neo Vision Furion, you'd probably want Locke so that you could imperil bows or guns for him. That would actually be a really handy combo. In addition to that, Locke also provides 120% imperils to water, fire, and earth. Also super handy. And he also does stat breaks. He has some good ones on demand at 85%, and then he also has the first ever 90% attack and magic break available on his limit burst. One of the things that makes Locke actually really insane, in my opinion, is that he has a passive that increases your gil obtained by 2,000%. Okay? So if you want to never, ever, ever be poor again, Locke is the guy to go with that. Like, the 2,000% gil increase is ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That's insane. You know, if you were to run a dungeon that gave you 100,000 gil, it instead would give you 2.1 million gil. It's insane. So you would literally never run out of money again. So, you know, if gil is a pain point for you and you need a breaker and you need, you know, someone who can do what Locke does, he really is the ideal candidate for that. In addition to some of those things listed above, he also has AoE Re-Rise on a cooldown, 50% draw attacks, 40% evade. He has a Provoke, he has AoE Fire Imbue, he has Mug, and a True Dispel, so, you know, all in all, his entire kit is quite full of a bunch of random bits and bobs, kind of like what you would expect from a Thief character, so he's ultimately quite worth going for if you need somebody in that role. Just for fun, I drafted up a little build for Neovision Locke to see what it would take to get him to full draw attacks and evade, and it takes almost nothing. If you have the right STMRs for it, he can be built for full draw and evade in 4 slots, which is pretty insane. As it is right now in Global, it typically takes 4 slots just for full evasion. But he has 40% evade when he has his TMR or his STMR equipped. In this build, we have the Materia, which is his TMR, and then I have a couple of evade daggers that give another 60%, so that's 100% evade, and then the Moogle Charm for 50% draw. That leaves you with 3, 4, 5, 6 spare slots to build him however else you want, whether you want him for damage or whether you want him to just be chonkier so he doesn't die or anything else like that. I mean, the world is your oyster with Neovision Locke. His build flexibility is insane, so huge fan of that. Now, the units that I'm the biggest fan of, okay, that I have a reputation for loving, okay, the characters that I care about the most probably in the game, other than maybe Veritas of the Light or maybe a couple other random ones, is, yeah, the Figa Bros. And Monk, Sabin of Cult's got the weirdest and coolest, in my opinion, like, he's got a very cool Neovision Awakening. So, at this point in the Japanese version of the game, there's really only a couple of Neovision tanks available, period. There's Daisy and Fina, the combo unit that looks atrocious and will get you on an FBI watch list if you pull for them. And then there's also Charlotte, who got a Neovision Awakening as a magic tank. And now joining the ranks of tanks is Monk, Sabin of Cults, and he gets both physical and magical cover. He gets some buffs and barriers for himself, and then he brave shifts into a mage, okay? So, as if 2020 didn't have enough plot twists, it's that Monk Sabin of Cults became a tank, and he brave shifts into a mage, and honestly, I think a lot of people look at him at face value and go, huh, how on earth can this guy possibly be a tank? How on earth could he be a mage? Well, here's the thing. When they gave him his Neovision Awakenings, they also gave him an absolute crapload of flat HP and flat magic to complement his stats. So we're going to go ahead and take a real quick look at a tank build that you could theoretically do for him, okay? Now this is with some high-end gear, so your mileage will vary. Another thing worth noting is that the vision card on this build is from Daisy and Fina, so if you have Daisy and Fina, you may as well use them instead of Monk Sabin of Cults, unless you just like hunky men more, which is definitely my speed. So the other thing that's worth keeping in mind is that if you have Yoshikiri, you can use Yoshikiri's card on Monk Sabin of Cults, and it would be probably a better choice since he's going to be double-handing spirit stuff as a magic tank. You can, of course, build him as a physical tank, but I thought it was pretty fun to show off that you can build him to almost 46,000 HP and 2,000 spirit. Like, what? It's insane. You know, this guy was a DPS, but, you know, building anybody to 46,000 HP, you know, I don't know really any other characters that can do that as easily as Monk Sabin of Cults can. And the funny thing is, he's not even capped on HP. If you wanted to cap him all the way out on HP just to see how much HP he can get over 53,000 hit points. Yeah, so, you know, the question of whether or not Monk Sabin of Cults can tank, I think the answer is definitely yes. Insane amount of HP, great amount of spirit. I think he's definitely definitely a weaker physical tank. He doesn't have the same passives as he does as a physical tank, or as a magic tank rather, but typically when you're doing a physical tank, you just build for evade anyways. So Monk Sabin of Colts, A+ tank. Now, if you wanted to use him as a damage dealer, you totally can. If you Brave Shift Monk Sabin of Colts, you get pretty much, I mean, he's a standard mage in terms of the way that he's built. You just use dual wield rods, he has true dual wield. He's very, very easy to build. And then they also gave him an insane amount of flat magic to go with it. So he's actually the first mage in the game that you can get to over 6,000 magic before buffs. And the crazy thing about him as a mage is that he has, in this particular build, he has 30,000 HP and almost 1,000 spirit without even trying. This is him with 6,000, like 5,900 magic, right? 30,000 HP, 900 plus spirit. Okay, this is an EP for damage build, but he also has 30,000 HP and over 900 spirit. Okay, like, ridiculous. You could, in theory, use him as a magic tank on the first turn and then Brave Shift him into his mage form, and he would still retain his magic cover, right? But instead he would be a mage who could actually do a little bit of damage. Now, it is worth noting that Monk Sabin of Colts does not actually have the highest modifiers on his magic skills. The only one that's any good is his light chaining one. That one is like a 75 times modifier that, if I remember right, he can quad cast. So he's not going to be doing top of the charts damage. However, the fact that you can combo his maginess with his tankiness as like the tankiest frickin' mage in the game, 30,000 HP, like, get me out of here. How many times have you tried to build a mage, but they're just made of limp noodle? Monk Sabin of Colts just does not have that problem, and so, you know, he's not going to be pulling top charts damage, but he is super, super cool, someone I'm very excited about, going straight from, you know, the bench where he's been resting for a while, all the way up into usable tier. Especially as a tank, you can do quite a lot with him. And the other thing that's worth keeping in mind is that Monk Sabin of Colts can multicast his cover with his healing skill, and if you use the build that I showed before where he has about 2,000 spirit, he can heal about 13,000 HP per cast with his healing skill that you can spam, and he can also heal himself for about 34,000 HP. So, you know, he's a healing tank. You can use him as that as well, which is really handy if you're someone like me who liked using Chow. So really, really awesome unit. I think a lot of people are going to have him underrated just from a damage perspective, and I think that's accurate. But as far as like a do a lot of things character, he absolutely has it. Now, speaking of characters that do a lot, the last character I want to do a highlight on today is Neovision Awakened King Edgar of Figaro, who I've dubbed like Tifa, except better, because King Edgar is the new bursty king over in the JP version. Of course, there are other characters that do comparable damage or that do comparable burst. Neovision Terra, for example, does more in certain situations, does comparable to King Edgar, whatever. Okay, there are cases where you would use one over the other. But King Edgar of Figaro got a massive facelift. If you have him, you're going to use him. I just guarantee it. So one of the big things that he has is he has access to Spear Imperils, and he himself becomes a Spear user in his shifted form. And these Imperils work just like the ones that we talked about before. It's a big boost in your damage. He also has on-demand stat breaks for attack, defense, magic, and spirit, so he can be your dedicated breaker as well. He also gets killer buffs to bird and machine, both that he can apply to the party or to himself, and he also has the fattest jump known to man. Okay, so this is our first Neovision era Dragoon character, and he does silly damage. Okay, he does silly damage. He does basically twice as much damage as Tifa does, just in his one jump. At like a minimum. He can do even more. And the way that he works gameplay wise, I'll just give you like a little bit of a sample teaser of what it's like to use him. His jump is a 2-turn timed jump, and his limit burst boosts the modifier on that jump, and it imperils spears. So Edgar does need a little bit of external support because he doesn't have any self-imbues or imperils to match necessarily. So if you're using someone like Yoshikiri, great combo to be using with Edgar, because you can give him the element damage buff, you can give him an imbue, you can give an appropriate imperil. But what you want to do with Edgar is you want to get his limit burst filled as soon as possible, pop his shifted limit burst off, which does an okay amount of damage, but more importantly imperils spears by 25%, and it adds 20 times to his 100 or his 80 times jump modifier. Turn 3, you're going to jump in the air, Turn 4, he's going to hang out in the skies, and then turn 5, you land him to finish a big fat chain. He does crazy damage, okay? So if you've enjoyed using Dragoons before, King Edgar Figaro is the man. He is incredible, he looks awesome, and he definitely lives up to expectations there. So with all of this being said and hyped around the FF6 cast, which will be coming to global in the next few months, I do have to put out a big old disclaimer, okay? These units represent what is likely to be the tip of the spear for new mechanics and unit features that will greatly shape the future of FFBE. Okay, I scripted this out because I wanted to make sure I said it as precisely as possible. FF6 is a great way to get a ton of value in just 2 banners, but will by no means be the only way to access the new mechanics and level of power that is to come, most likely. And what I mean by that is that we're seeing a lot of new mechanics introduced with the FF6 cast, from the Esper Fields to the Weapon Imperils, and those are all very, very, very powerful things, and those are things that I'm interested in. I want to get that, and it's because I love the FF6 cast, and it's because I'm interested in using those mechanics for myself. That being said, I could all but guarantee that we're going to be seeing these mechanics more and more regularly, so if you don't get the FF6 cast, you will be just fine. There will be other characters that provide similar mechanics, but the fact that you get so many of them just in a couple of banners, especially with characters that I really, really like, for me, it's kind of a no-brainer. So I know originally I had been talking about wanting to pull for Elena, but I frankly don't think they're going to be able to add any of these mechanics to Elena's kit in a meaningful way. They may be able to add like a sword imperil to Elena's kit, for example, which I think would entice a lot of people to play. My big problem is that there aren't a lot of good sword users, you know, so probably not for me. They'll probably give Elena an ice or water damage buff, which is great, but I already have Yoshikiri who can give that to anybody. Honestly, if they'd put Elena on a split banner with Yoshikiri, I might have been tempted to go for both of them, but at this point, because I know what's coming and some of the new mechanics and how big of an impact they make in the game, I'm not as interested in pulling until we kind of get to that point. I might go for something like Neovision's Soul, who has a very, very nice vision card. It gives a ton of magic, gives a ton of mag percentage when you have rods equipped, but other than that, this is what I'm looking forward to, and I figured I'd share it with you because a lot of times when I bring it up, people aren't aware of what's going on the JP side, which is totally fine. It's a great way to play, but I figured I would share some of the stuff I've been finding out about the FF6 cast with you so that you can make an informed decision. And that just about covers it. So thank you everybody for coming to hang out with us today. I look forward to seeing everybody at the stream on Wednesday, and we'll see everybody in the next video.